Thank you for the opportunity, Julia and Chris and everyone, for this gathering and putting together this great panel. I was brought in at the last minute to help moderate, and so in order to make the most efficient use of our time, I think we have 30 minutes or maybe less, we'll keep the introductions short. But basically, we wanted to go through some of the essential skills that we think a tech-savvy board should have. And if anyone wants to launch a cyber incident during this, I will let them know that I have a concealed permit carry permit, and I will shoot them. So. But please start off with the first question. I don't want to dive into AI first because I think we could talk about AI forever. So what I wanted to kick off the panel discussing was just simply digital transformation and what is on your corporate risk register, or at least what should be on your corporate risk register if you're headed towards that cloud journey. Because most of the digital transformation discussions are for sort of traditional on-prem businesses in manufacturing that are thinking of moving or are already begun moving into the cloud. We can go sequentially. This is fine.
This is like a loaded question already. I'll just keep this very short. I think a lot of corporate boards and executives are really struggling with how much to actually invest in cybersecurity in general. A balance between the workforce, product, the insurance side, all of these things kind of combine into this special pool mix where I feel, and I'm going to speak truth to power here, and what I've seen through the 20 years I've been doing this is most organizations are fully guessing at what and how much they should do. Despite all the studies, Gartner's and stuff out there, it's like, 4%, I think a lot of that is bogus. I've seen a continual reduction in cybersecurity investment in organizations, and I just feel that is the wrong decision.
Excellent. So you're talking about balance, and you mentioned cyber insurance. Certainly, if you don't have cyber insurance, you should put it on your corporate risk register. So next, Matej.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been in security education and governance risk compliance for about 25 years. I'm originally based in Europe, moved to the US about 3 years ago. When we talk about digital transformation, we need to understand that the board are generally speaking not really aware of the ecosystem that they need to protect, right? So one thing, though, is that drives me nuts is that when people say that the board doesn't understand risk, they understand risk because they deal with HR risk, with ESG risk, with financial M&A, government regulation, and so on. It's just that we as cybersecurity people, or nowadays AI deployment people or whatever, do not translate that risk in a business language that they can understand. And so that is creating a divide between the ability to maximize on AI deployments and the ability to remain secure and compliant.
Thank you. And Jeffrey.
Yeah, no, that's an important question because, I sit on a couple boards. I am an NACD certified board director. So I've been on both sides of the table, and I think that it's a really important conversation. The board does understand enterprise risk management. They have a lot of the financials. They understand enterprise risk, operational risk. Cybersecurity is a part of that. What they don't understand is deep technology, lots of acronyms, and the way that we typically are presenting things to the board. That conversation really needs to be a lot more practical and also a lot more, kind of just answering plain, simple English language questions like, so what? What if we don't do this? What if we do this? Like, what are the implications? And making sure that they understand what you're saying is really one of the key things that's our job, that when we go to the board, we have to really make sure that we are reading the room, not our presentation, and that everybody's following what we're saying.
Yeah, you're the former CISO for the state of Connecticut.
That's right.
So you're capable of going into the weeds.
Hands-on, absolutely.
One of the things that I remember at a boutique conference here in New York a while ago, someone put up a really great turn of phrase. Instead of cybersecurity awareness training, where we teach people to don't click on things, use strong passwords, don't share credentials, there was actually this idea that they should have business awareness training for cyber people. And so I thought that that would be useful, obviously, in this whole alignment. How do we learn to speak the business? How do we do a better job of describing risk without sort of going into the weeds? David?
Thank you. As Yogi Berra once said, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. But the future is here. In terms of the boards that I work with, and expanding on Jeffrey's comment, The NACD theory is if you're on the board, noses in, fingers out, and the management team makes the decisions, the technology decisions, but that doesn't eschew the board members from trying to understand technology in a more in-depth manner. But my firm, in tandem with Next Generation Governance Group, just did a survey, and I've got 6 bullet points I could share with you later, not to bore you. But with the average age of a director being 63.85 years, they probably grew up with color TV, but they probably don't know a whole lot about AI. So there's an educational gap right there. And that gap can be closed through a number of training and educational opportunities.
Yeah, let's open it up.
So I hate to disagree with that. What is missing on these boards is actually an individual already with those skills so they could be a consistent translator. The only reason I say that is like the amount of business risk decisions that are going to be made, especially in the next 2 to 3 years, that are so rapid in the next 2 to 3 weeks. You need someone on that board to be able to say, here's what it means, translate it, and also they're tied to that risk. I do not believe, even though I work for an education company, I've trained 50,000 individuals in incident response, that alone takes years. You're now talking about things, business decisions that used to take 6 months and you could study it. They're now business decisions that you're risking the business on and you have to make that in now 2 weeks.
I agree with you 100%. I'm not saying you don't need technology people on the board, just the opposite. I've spent my entire career in technology. I'm so old that I did the commercial launch and announcement of the IBM PC. The 3 things then were CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies we sold into were integrity, security, and control of information. What goes around comes around. That's never changed. My point is you have a very low percentage if you look at the C-suite. And today, in terms of the C-suite, and I'm not talking about CEO, COO, but you've got a chief information officer, you've got a chief artificial intelligence officer, you've got a chief compliance officer, chief data officer, chief data officer, chief information security officer. You have about 12 categories in the technology of C-suite, and we need to populate them more into the board. And it's always been, unfortunately, the lowest population at the board level, and we need to increase the technology board level.
Sorry, if I may bounce
please.
back on that. That's an interesting point, because if you think of NASDAQ quoted company or very, very big company, generally speaking, the CISO will get 15 minutes at every quarterly board meeting. So that's 1 hour per year, right? So unless you have a risk committee that's working with the CISO or has an inroads with the board, that's a problem. If you do a search on LinkedIn for chief AI officer, you're going to get hundreds of them. If you do a search for chief AI security officer, you're not going to get many of them, and most likely it will bring you back to CIO or CTO instead of CISO or chief privacy officer. And so I think that what we should be doing is talk to the board and say, make sure that the AI people talk to the compliance people and talk to the privacy people. So for me, it reminds me of the adoption of cloud 15 years ago, 20 years ago, where everything was bypassed. So in other words, operations, sales, marketing, where subscribing to services that completely bypass security and compliance. And I think we have a duty as security, cloud, AI people to educate the board on how we can bridge that gap.
I think you triggered an interesting thought that I'll improvise on this next question. When I get my time with the board, as a CISO for several companies previously, one of the things I actually found the board is most interested was investment advice, because they know you're the technologist. And so those 15 minutes don't always even get to talk about risk for the company. Oftentimes they're just looking, what's the next technology I should invest in? So I would like to run through each of you just saying, what type of meaningful conversations about risk that is technology driven can you have with the board if you have such limited access to their ears? Because I think it was Bob Lord of CISA and a previous CISO who came into Yahoo after their breach and to the DNC after their breach. He said at Black Hat a few years ago, Talking to the board is the easy part. Adding value to their thinking is what is difficult. So let's, any nuggets you have to share on how to add value to board thinking about technology-driven risk?
Scare them. And here's why. I'm sorry. They're making decisions, and I like using analogies. And what ends up happening right now, and there's so much technology and that is being introduced out there so fast, it is, I keep on going back to the education that's needed to be able to make some of these decisions, even just remove cybersecurity from it. You're making decisions, you're in 1998, and you're making a decision on the internet, and you never used a web browser, you've never done a single email. And why I'm pointing this out is, even though you have like chief AI officers, what I found at SANS, and we're looking for experts out there just to understand the baseline in AI security, no one knows it. There is this very small pocket, I'm probably talking to them at this point, because if you're an AI and you're an engineer, you're making seven-figure salaries developing AI, not doing security for it. This needs to be exposed, because when you end up trying to say, hey, we have a chief AI officer, our CISOs, CTOs, CIOs, we're assuming they have the knowledge. They do not. Everyone is faking it. Everyone in here, you have to do a hard ask to yourself, how much do you actually truly understand about AI, or are you just reading in the news about it? This is where, like, my mantra to the board currently is, if you are not doing a 30-minute workout, like for your health every single day, and also doing 30 minutes of AIs, how you use AI, even the board on a daily basis, how do you introduce it in your workflow? If you can't understand the basics, even how you're using it, how are you making a business decision on the company that you're on the board or you're an executive of? And I hate to call everyone out in here, is how many of you are working daily with AI? If you're not, you're risking your own professional careers at this point. That's how fast the technology is working. I could give 3 examples in the past 2 weeks of things that are released that scare me in terms of adversarial AI, in terms of what nation-state actors are going to be able to do. Example, everyone, if you have not heard MCP, that was released in the fall, everyone's like, oh, I kind of understand that. What about A2A? Microsoft just adopted it 3 days ago. It's agent to agent, along with MCP. This is the kind of stuff I'm researching at this point. And in the end, this is where, when you're making business decisions with the board, you have these executives, it has to be that baseline education, 30 minutes a day.
Yeah, so for me, I don't necessarily subscribe to the fear, but sometimes with the board, you have a point. You need to grab their attention, and you need to make sure that they're part of the problem and part of the solution. So I do a lot of board briefings, and I'm French and I'm a man, I'm very direct, so I offend people, generally speaking. And I was invited to do a board briefing for a NASDAQ-quoted company in DC. And so I took the train in the morning, and I was revising the slides that the CISO and I had prepared, and it said to me, my board, they're not a nice bunch of people, they're very arrogant, and they're very good, but they have a high esteem of themselves, so stay on track, otherwise you're going to get in trouble. And so I was Googling them on the train, and I was like, that board is a bunch of clowns. And when I got into the room, the CISO said, remember, stay on track. And so after about 5 minutes, they weren't listening to me at all, really not listening to me. And so I stood up and I said, guys, you really need to listen to me. You guys are in bad shape. So they started listening to me, and I said, you, sir, this is where you live, this is the car you drive, this is where you play golf, these are the cloud services that you're using, bypassing the company policy, and so on. And I said, you, sir, you've got a daughter, she's 13 years old, her boyfriend is 18, you might want to look into that. And I made them part of the problem, but equally, I believe that eventually they were thinking, we need to be part of the solution. And so somebody was laughing, somebody was embarrassed, and then another guy said, and who the F do you think you are? We're paying you to educate us, and you're just mocking us. And I was like, well, I'm the good guy. Imagine what the bad guys are going to do. And he was like, I don't buy that. And he picked up the phone and rang security. I was escorted out. And in the afternoon, I rang the CISO and I said, I'm really sorry, I screwed up. And he said, oh no, I've got their attention now. So there you go. I think making them part of both the problem and the solution so that they're really part of understanding that ecosystem, understanding the risks, and of course, understanding the new technologies.
You're my new best friend. We should go on and tag team this stuff. It'd be fun.
Are you guys free tonight?
We are.
Maybe a couple things to add to that conversation. There's a lot of pieces of this that you have to get right. And some of that is that the CISOs come in sometimes. I've been in boardroom conversations where immediately they're getting up and it's like, oh, the CISO's here. It's a great time to go get more coffee, right? Like, and they're leaving the room before you're even talking. And it's like, well, you have to make sure you're engaging. You have to make sure that the board actually understands that they do have a role and a responsibility and that they are, there's a liability that comes with this. And if they don't understand cybersecurity, we have to make sure that we're explaining it right. On the CISO side of things, I still see way too many CISOs who are coming into the board. They meet quarterly, maybe. They're coming in with 50 pages to go over in 15 minutes. That's the wrong approach, right? Like, I mean, you have to really think in very simple terms, like what are the top 3 takeaways you want them? I mean, don't do more than 3. People can't remember more than 3. Some of this has to be a long journey. There's also a tendency, especially with the technical people, I want to educate you all on every acronym I know and every single tool and toy, and it's like, they don't need to know that. They need to be at the 50,000-foot view, and you have to help them get there. And part of our role is to make sure that they understand risk and that we're explaining it in the way that makes sense, and that we're also, that we have to be a little bit more business savvy as a CISO too. I think it wasn't until I started running a few of my own LLCs that you start to realize it's like, well, I got to pay for marketing. I have all these tools. what am I doing about cyber? Oh, my router is aged. It's time to, well, it still works, right? Like, these are the kind of things that a real company does. And we have to understand that whole thing holistically to really have an effective conversation at the board level.
That was one of the things I remember reading about some of the SEC proposed regulations around board knowledge of cyber, and how does a security program, a security officer, know that the board paid attention? Do you give them a quiz at the end of the board meeting, and give them multiple choice? No, that's not going to work.
Why not?
Well, I think it would be interesting, especially if you threw up a QR code, all right, and had them fill it out on a SurveyMonkey or something. But
The best boards that I've worked with currently that are really taking this to heart, AI and digital transformation, and we haven't even gotten onto robotics. I mean, that supersedes AI in my humble opinion. But it's to spend more time with all the C people that I just mentioned, the 12. But what a lot of boards do now is they'll bring them in as board observers, and you have duty of care if you're on a board of directors, and to bring people in and have them be an observer. If you're going to have an executive session, obviously Chatham House rules, they've got to leave the room. But it gives them an opportunity to learn from the older dudes and dudettes that have been on the board, the institutional knowledge, which is important. But at the same time, the older dudes and dudettes start to understand technology better, and most people, it's propeller speak, bits, bods, bytes, whatever. You've got to, both parties have to speak the other's language. You're French, you probably speak fluent English because you're speaking English. You probably have another language, and so you need polyfluency in the boardroom. And those that are doing that, I think, are doing the best job right now. And what that does for succession planning, most boards now, it's 75 that you have to retire if it's S&P 500, Russell 3000, blah, blah, blah. Some of them are extending that, and some of them are receding that, like my hairline. They're bringing it down to a lower age. But that's a good way to bring in the new growth and make sure that we get C technology people on boards.
Yeah, one thing I'll mention is that I was on the board of trustees for the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, and I was one of the youngest board members and the only one that had technology experience. And it was important for us to think about succession planning, right? And to bring in younger, what did you say the average age was? 63?
63.58.
58. And it's amazing to think about, cybersecurity governance isn't going to get better until a bunch of people die. because they can't be educated quickly enough, so they're going to have to age out. But let's dive into the AI, because I know we have about 10 minutes, and I didn't want to start with AI. I just wanted to get us kick-started with the idea of risk management. So with AI, let me give you a quick quote. I teach cybersecurity at NYU, and we have a teaching with generative tools working group for the last 2 years. And we did a symposium, and I wanted to share a bit of wisdom that one of the students offered. Human knowledge is like sunlight. Large language models are like moonlight. And this idea is a very powerful, I think, metaphor to explain that, we can howl at the moon with vampiric intensity, and we can be like, the Wolfman, and the Wolverines and all. But really, all of this fervor around AI is just a reflection of human knowledge. And the only way we have life on Earth is because of sunlight. And it's the only nutritive, sustaining thing in our whole ecosystem of knowledge and data and understanding. At the moment, I don't believe there is anything called AI. It's just gussied up large language models and token prediction and machine learning. But we'll eventually get there. So this concept of AI, we talk about agentic AI and some of the risks where the robots start building the next generation robots and humans are out of the loop. What do you think are some of the skills that could possibly be indexed and tracked on a board in this direction? So I put together a skills matrix for the Jazz Museum. And people would say, I know finance, I know marketing, right? What is the large bucket that you would say would be interesting to track on a board skills matrix?
So here's the challenging part. I'll just be honest, or truth to power type situation here. We're going to look back at this time frame. We're not going to remember, hey, it was the age of Trump or anything. I'm not even going political. I don't really care about that. We're looking at life before the internet or life after the internet. And everyone remembers, who wasn't born in 1992, that when you go back and look at that, it's like, how did you find people to go to the movies with? How did you, buy things like books and send it to yourself? There's a before and after. There's a clear before and after that's going to occur. 20 years from now, you're going to look at this time right now and saying, oh, the transformation was happening. 2 years ago, it was before AI. 2 years from now, it's going to be after AI. Every single one of them need core AI knowledge. And this is, again, where it's like, what does that mean? I don't know, because 2 weeks from now, it's going to change. They need to be aware. It's almost like security awareness. They need to be aware of AI. And how do you do that? Currently, right now, there's no training courses. You cannot go online. You cannot do LinkedIn Learning. It is your personal learning. And I go back to that, like the takeaway here is like, how do you check the skill box? I would ask every single person on the board today. And if anyone in here is on a board, I would ask them today, how many of you, as your quiz, are putting in that 30 minutes a day learning AI? And I say learning AI, using AI, playing with AI, discovering with AI, putting a picture into ChatGPT and say, remove the car with AI. That's all you need to do to start playing with it and start understanding, because your brain, because they're smart people, all of them are geniuses, they're gonna figure out really quickly, it's like, oh shit, this is the internet and we're sitting in 1995.
Yeah, and we can't be like mathematics teachers, in the 1960s with the advent of a handheld calculator. We have to embrace and play with the technology. I would definitely agree. Matteo?
So I look back at GDPR, the European regulation, on 25th of May, 2018. Everybody updated their LinkedIn and became a GDPR professional or a privacy expert. Yes. Right? That's exactly that's your point. And so in the last 18 months, everybody became an AI specialist or an AI compliance super expert or whatever. And the reality is that, as you said, we don't have enough knowledge to know that. What's also interesting to see is what universities are doing. So similar to when cybersecurity became a thing, and we saw a lot of cybersecurity curricula coming out of universities and so on, and then we saw all of this, the CSI type thing, and we created all of those forensic investigators, and now we have too many, even though we have a lot more hacks. It's interesting to see that today you've got some universities creating AI curricula that the industry doesn't actually need. So what we need right now, in my opinion, would be some AI governance curricula, where we start looking at how can we actually govern the the building, the deployment, and the maintenance of AI in such a way that it doesn't increase our risk surface more than it already does, and that we can make sure we don't fall out of compliance. And that part is really interesting, and I think that if you look at AI governance frameworks, right now there's about 50. There's regulation, there's proprietary frameworks, there's frameworks by ISACA, ISSA, Cloud Security Alliance, I believe SANS might have one as well.
NIST has one.
NIST. And you look back at cybersecurity 20 years ago, there was about 100, and now we really dialed down to about 6 to 10, NIST, HIPAA, CIS, ISO, SOC 2, and so on. And my hope is that we can learn from what we've done with cyber and accelerate that learning curve.
Yeah.
To your point on governance, what's interesting, and you hail from you were in the state of Connecticut, I live there now. There was a news bulletin last night that the Connecticut State Legislature wants to take an AI bill forward, and if you use AI, it has to authenticate where the sources of information come from, and on and on and on and on and on. And the end of the report, and it's not a political thing, they were surmising that the governor will veto the bill because states shouldn't be making that decision. So you say, okay, 50 states, so 50 non-decisions. Do we kick it up to the federal government? How about companies? If it's a publicly traded company, if it's a PE company, not-for-profit, who makes the decision? So I think we're all in violent agreement that there has to be guardrails someplace, and how do those get implemented, and who's going to implement them?
I'm going to jump in just because of what you said and what you said. Again, one sentence here.
I love your passion.
With GDPR, we appreciate that. With GDPR, they have the forget me, portion. It's like, I want to be removed from that. You cannot unbake a chocolate chip from a 175 billion parameter cookie. That is in LLMs. The governance that's currently in place for GDPR is not up to date with AI, and that's your point. You have to have people who can't just label themselves as AI experts. We actually need people who understand AI, but we need AI, awareness in general, so they would understand. It's like, can you actually remove me from that cookie? And the answer is no.
Some of this you have to make sure that first of all, your C-level executives are really C-level executives, that they're sitting at the board level and that they're actually having that communication. A lot of the challenges that we see with this is that boards themselves need to self-reflect. And, we're primarily talking about AI and cyber and tools and things like that. But even, we still see boards that are banking companies and they have no banking experience on the board. That's a real fundamental. I mean, it's hard to kind of like, how do we make IT work on top of that, right? Like it's already the wrong structure.
Or the CISO at UHG, who didn't have, I like to make a joke. There's, in North America, if you check LinkedIn Sales Navigator, there's about 8,000 people that self-identify as a CISO. I would say about 4,000 of those are aspirational. They'd like to be a CISO, but they're not. And then half of those that remain are imposters. So there's really only 2,000 interesting CISOs in North America who have the skills, the hard skills and the soft skills to do the job.
In terms of governance,
We're AI experts now.
in terms of governance and duty of care at the board level, I think it's incumbent upon boards to come up with core competencies as it relates to AI, a scorecard, if you will, a report card, and each board member should be reviewed. You could do peer review, which is never optimal, but if you get third-party independents, to your point, sir, that have the subject matter expertise, then that way you're keeping everybody honest in the room, and if you're not at that level, then you probably shouldn't have a seat at the board table.
Let me finish up with one last topic to throw out there. Ethics. I think when we talk about AI, there should be certain principles that could be disclosed as your ethical principles for the use of AI in a publicly traded company. And so I'm proposing a course actually to NYU on the praxis of business ethics. And I wanted to have a few case studies like Mudge at Twitter. Right? Would you give up a $7 million severance package in order to file a whistleblower report with the SEC? And then have people talk through and exercise that ethical muscle, right, so that it doesn't atrophy, so that we at least know what our moral compass is as business leaders. Last round of walkthrough. Let's start with you and work this way. What do you think would be an interesting statement of a principle of ethics for the use of AI for DHL, for example?
Well, since I advise other companies, it's more what they're going to put together and does it meet their mission and vision statement and the ethos. And to stay above the letter and the spirit of the law, as you've just used an example of somebody taking the money and run $7 million. We've got to put guardrails in place, and I think those are going to have to be determined in the very short term. I don't think there are enough of them right now.
So companies don't lose their liability, though. You have to make sure that that we're treating our data in the right way, that we're not overtraining things. One of the problems with AI, once the material is put into the model, you can't get it out. You can't just say like, hey, could you forget about that document I just gave you? It's like, no, you can't.
The jury is instructed to ignore the testimony of that last inject or prompt. Yes.
Exactly. So. I think that's some of the problems here, but it's a long trip and it's a very dynamic environment. I mean, things change every day, and I mean we see this very closely at Microsoft, and part of our job is to make sure that this works globally for everybody. First couple of days of Copilot, I mean, I can just share my own user experience because I wasn't even a Microsoft employee at that point, but I was like, boy, this thing is edgy. It's saying like, you already asked me this question. Why are you, it was just like they had to tune that like really carefully to make sure that it wasn't going to be offensive to people. I mean, these are the kind of things. You can't put a chatbot out on the internet and let somebody poison it, and now it's cursing at people and giving illegal advice. These are real stories. I'm not even making this up. AI incident response is something that every CISO should probably think about.
So I would say that in terms of putting the right guardrails, they need to be very simple, and the board needs to be able to answer them. And I'm going to put in a shameless plug for a security methodology that I created about 15 years ago called the 5 Pillars of Security Framework. And I think that applies to AI as well. It's about physical security, people security, data security, infrastructure security, which is your environment, and then incident response. And we all spoke about all of those 5 pillars. And if you speak to the board that way, they will actually understand, and you'll be able to start pushing out guardrails. The only other alternative is you build an AI app to manage the other AIs, but I'm not sure that's the right thing to do.
No, I don't think so.
So I'm glad I'm going last, by the way, because this one actually ends up being, and again, I'm a cybersecurity nut. I help develop the field. I am, we talk about digital forensics. Yes. The reason I'm going to say this is that I actually feel the boards, when you're hiding, I could use the word, hiding behind ethics and governance, and you're trying to slow down what basically looks like scary technology. Why? What's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 years is that either you adopt AI today, and the boards are asking, what are we doing in every single part of the organization to pull AI in? Now, everyone's going to say, what are the ethics? Everything, the example you said, whistleblowers, that is not your risk. The risk is your company is not going to be here in 4 years. It's AI or die right now. If you haven't adopted it and you're moving forward, your organization, your company is out of business in 5 years. I guarantee it. Moderna, if you saw the news this week, and this is, again, one of the shocking things, I recommend going and Googling this, actually, sorry, using Perplexity and validate this. They just merged their IT and HR departments, and that causes everyone in here to have your brain melt just a little bit. Moderna has a board that is asking the right questions. We need to transform the organization, and we need to do it smartly in a way that reduces risk. And that's where we have these 50 compliance, governance, everything else. That's hogwash. There's like 3 key questions you need to ask as the board. Is everyone learning it? Are we experimenting it? And we're not putting it into some sort of R&D department that's going to solve the problem for the rest of the organization. CFOs, the financial team, need to play with AI to figure out how AI applies to finance. There's no training course on this, and you could hide behind ethics, but you're risking the organization. Ethics are important, but it's not as important as saving the org.
And the audit committee needs to fund it.
Yes.
And thank you all for your attention today. And thank you. Let's give a round of applause for our experts.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we're taking the photos, we are going to go into the next 2 panels right away. Matthew will be signing his book, which I already have my signed book from Matthew, and I read it, and it's like a fantastic book. and speaking about like actionable insights, that's exactly, he's got an actual framework that we can apply.